The time has come for us to dig into instructional planning. We encourage you to either print or have an electronic version of the instructional plan document open to take notes on. While the hope is for us to provide a comprehensive overview of instructional planning for both Chicago and Chicagoland field base, we do encourage you to pause, rewind, and rewatch this lesson to gain a deeper understanding of instructional plan requirements for this semester. All right, let's get to it. Let's first take a look at page 1 of the plan. You will see there is a place for you to include the lesson plan number, the subject you are teaching, the date you will teach your plan, and the class period or time of day that instruction will occur. Across the top, we have a grid that will help to ensure that your plans are aligned by considering the standards, learning goal, lesson objectives, and assessment procedures. We want to make sure that all of these components are aligned and connect to each other. We will begin with the standards section. You will access the new Illinois Learning Standards from the ISB website to align with your overall learning goal and lesson objective. State the specific strand number and paraphrase or copy the description of the standard that corresponds to your lesson objective that's outlined in your lesson plan. Students with disabilities have the right to access the general education curriculum unless otherwise indicated on their IEP. Therefore, the identified standard indicates that the instruction that you are presenting is relevant, necessary, and purposeful. To determine which set of standards are appropriate for you to use, please review the IEPs of all of your learners in the state assessment section of the IEP. Please check if any of your learners will participate in the DLM or dynamic learning maps. If any learners are required to take the DLM per their IEP, then you will utilize the essential elements of the Common Core. All other learners will connect to the English Language Arts, Math, Science, or Social Studies standards. Additionally, if you are teaching any learners that have behavioral needs per their IEP, you will also make a connection to the social emotional learning standards that you will be addressing in your lesson objective. As a reminder, you can access all standards on the ISB website as well as on our ReggieNet site. Next, we're going to take a look at the learning goal or the target skill. You will select one learning goal that is focused on the academic content that you are planning to teach. Consider this as the big picture of what you're planning to teach during a learning segment of 4 to 5 lessons. Think about the overall learning goal as a short-term learner outcome that is achieved over time by meeting lesson objectives. An example of this could be if I had a learning goal for learners to write a 5-paragraph expository essay. This is the big picture, but I will write daily lesson objectives to be completed over 4 to 5 days that will perhaps begin with composing a thesis statement and then move into an introduction, a body with supporting details, and ultimately a conclusion. Hopefully this gives you some perspective on how the learning goal is the overarching idea and the lesson objectives are scaffolded to ultimately achieve that goal. Let's talk about objectives. Each objective will include the 4 defining components of condition, learner behavior, and criteria. The objectives will reflect a relationship to the learner's IEP, when possible, and state standards while specifically supporting the outcomes anticipated for this instructional plan. The objective must be meaningful in describing the skill or skills which the student will perform and how it will be measured. Multiple objectives may be necessary to demonstrate the teacher candidate's understanding of the diversity of the learner population and to appropriately plan for differentiated instruction. Some objectives may be applicable to all learners involved in the lesson, while a single objective may additionally be noted to address the individual needs of a specific learner. Objectives should not be limited to the specific content knowledge, but should also reflect communication and social, emotional behavior outcomes as appropriate. Let's take a closer look at how we might differentiate our objectives. So as a starting point, you will write a lesson objective that you feel is the appropriate for the majority of your learners. Let's take a look at the objective that's written in green. When presented with 10 addition fact flashcards with sums that are no greater than 5, students will orally state a minimum of 8 correct within 20 seconds. And then in parentheses, you will see the initials of your learners AA, BB, and CC. As we begin to think about other learners, the conditions or criteria of the original objective may need to be differentiated. So we'll look at learner DD and EE. DD will orally state a minimum of 8 correct sums, but within 1 minute. EE, when presented with 10 additional flashcards, no greater than 5, will have the addition of manipulatives. So you'll see that the overarching objective is the same, but the conditions or criteria has changed for the individual needs of learners DD and EE. Notice now that we have a number 2 next to the next objective. This is where you will include an objective for any of your learners that require additional social emotional supports. Here is an example. Given a verbal review of the 5 expectations at the beginning of the lesson and visual cues on the rubric, along with a self-assessment related to active engagement, learners will remain engaged in the lesson to earn at least 4 out of 5 points on the engagement rubric. This is for learners FF and GG. You will see for learner HH, it's differentiated to be 3 out of 5 points because that is what is needed for the criteria for that learner. The example we shared was a math example, but other examples could include reading comprehension. For example, some of your learners might be working on inferential questioning, but some might be working on literal questions. If you were working on writing, would they be doing that independently or using some sort of sentence frame or word prediction software? Also consider the level of independence. Some learners may be doing an objective completely independently, while others will have some support. And just as a side note, if you are teaching one-on-one, then you don't need to differentiate your objectives necessarily, but you may want to consider this for the future. Up next, we have our assessment procedures. How will we know if our students are meeting the lesson objective? You're going to specifically describe here and illustrate the data collection tool or tools that will be employed to measure each learner's performance in relation to each instructional objective. If appropriate, please attach a copy of the data collection tool or tools. Also include the process by which data will be collected and by whom. Will it be you, the lead teacher, a paraprofessional? Be sure to discuss how to record responses and include a key when appropriate. If you happen to be taking data during systematic instruction, please clarify such aspects as time delay before and after, system of least prompts, least to most, etc. Next section is the connection to learners with IEPs. It says for us to list each student's bolded initials. So you'll see on the left that we have our learners AA, BB, FF, and GG. You'll also see that there is a number next to each of those set of initials. So for AA and BB, that means there's an IEP connection to my academic lesson objective. For learner FF, they have an IEP connection to the academic objective as well as the social emotional objective. And for learner GG, they have an IEP connection to the social emotional objective. If you have some learners that you're teaching that don't have any connection to their IEP, please include their initials and then you can state NA that there are no applicable IEP connections. However, we do want to remind you that you can find IEP connections through a variety of ways, including the goals, accommodation section, assistive technology, or information that is given in the PLAF. And you should also make sure that you are including strengths and supports. You will state the specific IEP goal and/or objective that corresponds to your objectives outlined in your instructional plan. The identified IEP goal objective indicates that this instruction is relevant and necessary for purposeful learning. Next, we're going to take into consideration your learner's prior knowledge. So consider, what prerequisite skills do your learners already have? Then ask yourself, what skills do you know that your learners already have that lead you to believe that what you have planned they are going to be successful with? As a note, don't forget to consider prior knowledge for both your academic and social emotional learning objectives. Next, we have our materials, assistive technology, and instructional technology, and we ask that you label each category just as is modeled here on the left. Please list all materials, supplies, and equipment that are necessary for the lesson. Consider enhancements for your instruction, such as visual aids, instructional and assistive technology. Specifically include any names of text or systematic instructional programs. You may want to attach these materials when appropriate, especially for those plans that you're submitting for a grade. Please plan for how you're going to present this organization, the arrangement, accessibility of these materials and resources to effectively support the pacing of the lesson, and that it appropriately facilitates the utilization and meaningfully responds to your learners' needs. The next section of your plan is to provide cultural and linguistic responsive considerations. Throughout the semester, we are going to be discussing different ways in which you can embed culturally responsive practices into your daily instructions. But a few suggestions that might get you started would be to provide windows, mirrors, and doors into your content selection. Allow your learners to use their native or home language. Try to integrate relevant world issues into your teaching. Make sure that you're working on vocabulary development and offer diverse perspectives. Use knowledge and experience of your learners. Provide active learning opportunities. Provide some choice and promote collaboration. All right, we're moving into the communication section of the lesson plan. And please note there will be an additional presentation all about the communication skill, but here's an overview for our lesson planning. What is communication? Teachers need to communicate to present and elicit information, and students need to communicate to access and to demonstrate their learning. First, you will consider the academic language that your learners will need in order to access learning. Consider the vocabulary and instructional language that is foundational to the lesson. Vocabulary can be words. They could be symbols such as addition signs, dollar signs, percentage signs, etc. ASL could be considered vocabulary, as can picture cards for communication boards. We should also consider that academic language can include nonverbal social cues, such as raising our hand when we want to indicate that we'd like to speak, or putting our finger over our mouth when we want to indicate that it's time to be quiet. For this example, let's say that our learning goal for our lesson is going to be adding coins together for various denominations. Our vocabulary might include words like penny, nickel, dime, quarter, silver, copper, presidents, value, add, coin, etc. Our communication skill is the specific ways in which communication will be used by our learners to participate in the learning task and or to demonstrate their learning. The skill can focus on understanding or interpreting communication on its actual use. On your instructional plan form, there are several examples to guide you in selecting a communication skill for your learning segment. See the examples next to the arrow. These examples include retelling a story, explaining a mathematics problem-solving strategy, answering questions, appropriately expressing frustration, selecting the right sign, requesting assistance, selecting a picture, starting or stopping communication, and responding to a prompt or a cue. So let's continue on with our example of adding coins of various denominations together. The learning objective or skill relates to addition and finding sums. The communication skill is to identify different coins by their name and value. Perhaps you have a variety of coins on a table and point to a particular coin and ask a learner to verbalize the name and value. This type of communication demonstrates learning, but it is different from the objective of addition. Finally, communication skills, strategy, and support. So strategies that are used to build the focus learner's goal-related communication with a learning task. These strategies involve modeling the appropriate communication for learners to understand or to use in a learning task, as well as some opportunities within guided practice, generalization, and maintenance. Now we're moving into the body of your instructional delivery. So here you're going to make a pedagogical decision on which instructional delivery format will be the most effective. Please highlight whether you will use systematic instruction, a scripted or direct instruction format, explicit instruction, or use problem-based learning. If you're interested in using an instructional delivery method other than one that is listed here, please check with your supervisor or field-based coordinator first. Now we're moving into the body of the lesson. So we ask that you begin in the middle and begin to make considerations of how you're going to open the lesson, what your body will be, and the closing of your lesson. You can use bullets for each section and note the prompts that are guides for you to consider within each section. So as you're making some considerations for the opening of the lesson, consider how are you going to gain your students' attention? What is your hook going to be? Do you need to review any prerequisite skills that are critical to this learning? Do you need to review expectations for the learning? Then you're going to move into the body of the lesson. This will vary based on the pedagogy that you have chosen. So if you're doing the systematic instruction, you will list your different prompts that you are going to include. If you're choosing explicit instruction, then perhaps you'll start with your input, modeling, guided practice, independent practice, etc. As you close the lesson, then you're going to make some decisions on whether or not you need to review the information that was covered, preview information that might be coming in your next lesson, or make some considerations for how you're going to transition between the end of this activity into the next. Now we will consider the learning tasks, instructional strategies, plan supports, and any modifications or accommodations that will be needed for each section of your plan. Given that instructional groups of learners may present with very diverse communication, cultural, academic, social, emotional, physical, and behavioral needs, we should consider the individuality of each learner in relation to these instructional objectives, our instructional sequence, and our methodology. Evidence-based strategies aligning with the IEP and our learners' needs will be considered as you choose strategies to support your content, process, and product for each learner. For those individual learners that require your methodology to be enhanced or remediated, identify the learners by their initial and specifically detail the type and level of support in the left-hand column that will accommodate the learner to promote their success. Consider time variations, specific prompts, differentiated materials, assistive technology, etc., that is appropriate for each individual learner. Additionally, if you have a learner who has a behavior plan or requires some social emotional support, consider where within the lesson you are going to be providing that support. Strategies employed will represent evidence-based best practice, and teacher candidates will describe how the accommodations will be addressed during the lesson and by whom. The final column on this page is elicit and monitor student responses with the green bracket. Given that learners must demonstrate understanding to successfully advance through the lesson and complete guided and independent practice activities, it is important that the teacher candidate systematically elicits and monitors student responses to assess each learner's understanding of the content as the lesson progresses. Teacher candidates will plan for, elicit, monitor student responses by writing the exact questions or tasks which will be presented to the learner. Teacher candidates will evidence differentiated questions and tasks to appropriately assess each learner's understanding. Assessing learners' understanding may take on a variety of approaches, including direct questions, visual monitoring, the completion of a task, or specifically state what you will do and when you will do it. All right, wow, you finished your lesson. Give yourself a pat on the back. How did it go? Did everything go as you planned? Were there any hiccups? How was your pacing? Now it's time for us to reflect on your learner performance data so that you can begin making consideration for your next plans. Our instructional plan daily reflection. Teacher candidates are asked to objectively and professionally summarize and analyze their learners' performance with respect to the established objectives that you wrote. Refer to the data and process when noting the learner's current level of performance. Provide your raw data for each learner and identify if the objective was met or not. Identify each learner's strengths during the lesson and complete an error analysis. So you'll discuss those error types. State other pertinent observational data that may impact your future planning and learner performance. With the expectation that data drives instruction and with regard to data analysis, you will specify the changes which will enhance learner success and provide a strong rationale. To assure appropriate instruction in the subsequent lessons, you will make the necessary modifications and adjustments to these prepared plans and submit or discuss these modifications with your cooperating teacher. Please note here, you will include the learner's initials. Here you'll include your raw data. Also note here it shows number out of number, but use whatever criteria you have in your objective. You'll include your strengths, errors, and then there's a separate chart that you will complete for learners that have social emotional learning objectives. We ask that you use your evidence, your data, to inform your future teaching practice to meet the varied learner needs. You're going to reflect on these prompts that are provided to analyze your teaching effectiveness. This reflection will evidence your ability to independently generate meaningful approaches to enhance instructional effectiveness and advance your learners' outcomes. Let's take a look at these 3 prompts. The first is data-based decisions. How did you observe your learner actively engage in the lesson? We ask that you provide 2 examples of specific learners and indicate their strengths or areas that they were challenged with the task. The second prompt asks you to describe your error patterns that are related to your data. Or if there were no errors, what conclusions do you draw about your learner's skills? Does this mean you should increase this condition or the criteria or perhaps their level of independence? And finally, analyze your teaching performance. What will you change for tomorrow's lesson? Offer a rationale as to why. Consider your instructional strategies, modifications, a review, extra review in your guided practice, Do you need to alter your assessment or adjust your input, etc.? So now that you have had an overview of instructional plans, what are your questions? This would be a great time for you to begin chatting with a collaborative partner, or please join us for office hours. We ask that you refer back to this throughout the semester as a way to deepen your own understanding. Thanks so much and happy planning!